Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's special executive. I will go through the preliminaries, and then I'll ask Mr Moody just to give an overview of the process that we'll be using today, as it is a wee bit of an unusual situation for the executive to be in. But first of all, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Convener, we have apologies submitted by Bailey Buchanan.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Hannah?
Not a declaration of interest, but just a transparency statement. I have had a lot of contact with the Bowman Hill ski slope and have given them a kind of guidance and support, but it does not constitute a necessity of a declaration of interest.
Okay, thank you. I will declare an interest in item 4, the community asset transfer at Bairnsford Community Hall, and will recuse myself of that item as I provided a letter of support to the organisation as part of the process. If there are no other declarations at this time, I'll go to Mr Moody just to explain the process that we'll be adopting today and dealing with the papers before us.
Yes, thank you, Convener. And it's maybe worth just saying a word to start off with on why we're adapting our procedures this morning. And that is because the applications for community asset transfers are treated as if they are quasi-judicial for the purposes of the Code of Conduct for councillors. Now, there's been some debate around that since the inception of the legislation, but the matter has been made clear in the most recent iteration of the guidance from the Standards Commission that these are to be treated as quasi-judicial applications. And I think when you look at the overall position on that, you can see the logic in that. This is an application by a third party to the council, where the council has to apply a statutory test. There is a review right within the council, and there's also an appeal right to the Scottish ministers. So it has many of those characteristics of quasi-judicial decision-making that are familiar in other arenas, such as planning and licensing. So the consequence of that, I think, requires us to adapt our decision-making in the way we consider the applications this morning. So one of the changes which has already passed is that there's no need for prior motions and amendments, and none have been submitted on that basis. The decision-making is also, I think, suitable for officer introduction rather than moving straight to questions. And Mr Kettrick will give an introduction to each item and then also give a general overview to the reports just prior to the consideration of the first substantive item on Limerick Community Hall. Then there will be an opportunity for questions to Mr Kettrick and his colleagues, and I think the decision-making will emerge from the discussion which follows on from that. So that's the broad shape of the adaptation to our normal procedure, which flows from these being community asset transfers. I'll pause there, Convener, to see if there are any questions from members.
Are there any questions from members in relation to the process? Councillor Spears.
Just to say that I have been present at a meeting in Limerick regarding the process, but it doesn't inhibit me from making decisions on this.
Okay, that's noted. Okay, we will now move into the first item, which is community asset transfer of Limerick Community Hall, and I'll go to Mr Kettrick.
Good morning, members. Prior to going through the Limerick report, I'd like to highlight that the 5 reports that will be presented today are, as Mr Moody highlighted, quasi-judicial and are broken down into 3 main regulatory elements for members of the executive to consider. These are that the proposals being presented are community asset transfer applications in accordance with the Community Empowerment Scotland Act 2015, which enables community transfer bodies to make requests for the council to transfer ownership, lease or other rights they wish in respect of council assets. Members required to consider the applications in the context of this legislation. Asset transfers are presumed to be at the best consideration. However, the council can vary this, and in that regard, a second regulatory aspect is that the proposed transfers are for less than best consideration, and therefore Section 11 of the Local Government Scotland Act 2003, which amends Section 74 of the Local Government Scotland Act 1973, applies. And in respect of disposals of land and buildings, the disposal of land by Local Authorities Scotland Regulations 2010 sets out the procedure the council must follow in determining the benefits and disbenefits of such a proposals, and members required to consider the proposals in the context set out in the regulations and meeting the criteria set out within them. The third element is where groups have applied for enabling funding under the Strategic Property Review Enablement Fund, and members required to consider the wording of this support to enable works to take place to support the community asset transfers, the governance arrangements associated with these, together with ensuring that these awards demonstrate best value. Within the reports, all of these aspects are covered, and officers have provided their opinions on them in respect of each and the tests that are required under these. Mr Henderson, the Legal and Procurement Manager, is in attendance today to support members on any legal matters, and obviously Mr Moody is also in attendance today as the Chief Governance Officer and is able to provide guidance. I will now move on to LimeRig, and the purpose of this report is to agree to the community asset transfer of ownership of the LimeRig Community Hall to LimeRig Action Group with a sale price of £1, reflecting the benefits that will derive from the project. Recognising the group is making a request as a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation with suitable community-led membership and has a properly formed and constituted board of trustees as required under the Act, officers are satisfied that this is a valid application, it has been validated and the appropriate notifications have been undertaken. In taking the decision to asset transfer, members must consider whether the proposals will promote or improve the matters outlined in section 5.1 of the report. Officers are of the view that they do, and have highlighted this in the evaluation of the application and the supporting business plan at sections 5.13 to 5.15. The evaluation is considered compliant in terms of the assessments required with the Council's statutory obligations. The assessment of the business plan outcomes for all the non-financial elements were considered to be either strong or very strong and show that the benefits were very good with a series of strongly positive outcomes. In respect of the Enabling Fund, the proposed grant sum is up to £123,000, £875 for works, and these works are outlined in the table at section 5.19. Should members of the Executive agree to asset transfer, it is asked to instruct the Director of Place Services to prepare and issue a decision notice containing the necessary legal arrangements to incorporate an option for the Council to reacquire the property in line with the circumstances that are outlined in paragraph 7.16 of the report. And I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Kettrick. I will now open it up for any questions in relation to the report and the proposal before us. Councillor Patterson.
Hi. Apologies if I'm about to confuse things. I just wanted to clarify on a couple of issues. First, I mean, obviously it goes without saying, absolutely delighted for the groups that have got to this stage and really appreciate all the work that Paul and his team have put in, because it's no easy feat. And I know that a lot of the interested parties are watching today, so I would really love it if we could take a moment just to talk about what the next steps are, because I know, you know, it is a very complicated issue, but for the assets that are potentially getting approved today, it would be great to know what the next steps are. And also for transparency, and happy to take advice on this, is that at the beginning of the process at the LimeRig Community Hall, I did put in a letter of support, but obviously since we had clarification that this was a quasi-judicial process, I took a step back from that. So happy to take advice on whether or not it is appropriate for me to vote on this item.
Okay, I'll go to Mr Moody.
I think, Convener, the safer course of action would be for Councillor Patterson to recuse herself on this item. I think the letter of support could be interpreted as a pre-disposition or determination of the application, and I do appreciate the point that Councillor Patterson has made that the advice on it being a quasi-judicial application came later in the day. So I think it's an understandable position to be in, but the prudent course of action would be to declare that interest as she has just now and withdraw from this item and return on the next one.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr Moody. Totally appreciate it, and my apologies to the Limerick Action Group. Obviously, I would have voted on this issue if possible.
Okay, Councillor Patterson, we'll let you just withdraw for now.
Sorry, just on the second point as well, obviously I'll not vote, but I would just still love a wee bit of clarification with the next steps for the items today.
I think we would need to maybe ask another member to maybe put that forward.
Okay, thanks.
Just for transparency, having declared an interest. So if you can withdraw, Councillor Patterson, we can ask one of the other colleagues to raise that. Okay, Councillor Redman.
I just raised the same question that Councillor Patterson raised about what the next steps will be for the groups. Should this be agreed for them today?
Okay, I'll go to Mr Kettrick.
Thank you, Convener. The current position is that if members were decided to approve the asset transfer request, a decision notice will be issued. Upon the issue of that decision notice, from the date of the decision notice, groups have up to 6 months from then to make their request to acquire the property. Now, at the moment, all the groups, and Limerick is no different, have a lease agreement in place. The Limerick one, though, does expire in, I think it's January, it's outlined in the report. They have been offered the full repair and insurance licence, as of other groups, to continue the operation of the building. Our expectation is that upon issuing the decision notice, we will move to the disposal process fairly quickly, but at that point it is up to the groups. They have up to 6 months to request formally the transfer of the asset, and colleagues will be engaging with groups to take them through that part of the process.
Okay. Billy Kerr.
Thank you, Convener. Just leading on for that then Paul, if there is, I know we've supported a lot of groups with regards to money for legal aspect of the transfers, and I don't know if Limerick's one of them, but there'll be some that are transferring over in January. If they haven't completed that because of the legal side, do we finish supporting them then, or will we support them through until it's complete?
Ms Kershak.
Convener, the council's committed to supporting groups in any way we can. So come January, they will move on to the full repair and insurance licence, we hope, but that is their decision. That keeps the facility open. In terms of funding to support that conveyancing process, we did have community available funding that was available. There is still some funding left there to support groups. That will kick in at that point. There is also third-party funding that's available through whether it's a lottery or other bodies who will help support groups who are going through the asset transfer process. So colleagues will now be engaging with groups, if members are decided to approve the asset transfer request, on helping them through that conveyancing process. So there will continue to be support. This isn't the end of the process. This is very, very early on. We've also awarded, as members will be aware, FRI funding for groups who took on the FRI licence this year to try and help them with that transition. And Limerick was obviously one of those groups.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kettrick and Chris. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there's no further questions, I would like to formally move the recommendations within the report, and it's open to anyone. Councillor Bailey-Kerr.
I form a second.
Thank you. Is everyone agreed?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I will now withdraw for the next item and ask Councillor Garner to take the chair.
Thank you. And no, you're not allowed to heckle. Bailey-Kerr. We move on to agenda item 4, community asset transfer, Bainsford Community Hall. And again, I'd like to ask Mr. Kettrick to speak to the report.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Thank you. This report is for Bainsford Community Hall and the proposed transfer of it under a 25-year full repair and insuring tenant basis lease for £1 per annum. Council Executive should recognise that Bainsford Hall Community Group are a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation with a suitable community-led membership and a formally constituted Board of Trustees as required by the legislation. Their application has therefore been validated and their business plan has been evaluated also, and the appropriate notifications have been made. In taking the decision on asset transfers, members must consider the proposals will promote or improve the matters outlined at 5.1 of the report. Officers are of the view that they do, and have highlighted this in the evaluation of the application and the supporting business plan at sections 5.19 to 5.21. The evaluation is considered compliant in terms of the assessments required by the Council and in terms of its statutory obligations. The assessment outcomes are that all non-financial elements were considered either strong or very strong and show the benefits were very good with a series of strongly positive outcomes. In respect of the Enabling Fund, the proposed grant sum is up to £78,960 for works as outlined in the table at 5.25. Should members of the Executive agree to asset transfer, it is asked to instruct the Director of Police Services to prepare and issue the appropriate decision notice containing the necessary legal arrangements for the lease. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kettrick. Do members have any questions? Councillor Redmond.
Yeah, it was just a quick one on the enabling funds. Could you maybe talk about the process of when the groups will get this, and then obviously with the enabling funds as well, I think we were talking about it was aimed at match funding. So is the enabling funds, are the groups receiving enabling funds, is that dependent on any match funding coming forward, or can the groups just expect that to come into their bank accounts on the day that they take over running of the asset?
Deputy Convener, we've outlined in the report the governance arrangements. So upon them taking on the asset, there will be a commitment given by the Council as part of that decision notice, which will reflect in there. It'll be a separate part of that notice, which will say the Council will grant up to whatever the amount is of the enabling funds, in this case for Bainsford. Once the asset transfers, they will be able to use that funding as match funding, but it is likely that in advance of that, they will use our decision today, if it is to approve, to go to funders to seek match funding. And in that case, we would happily issue any letters of support on the basis of our decision to support those applications to match funders, and that's appropriate. But the money does not transfer immediately upon the transfer of the asset. It will be paid in phases of the works as they are undertaken. So there'll be so much paid up front for the appointment of contractors and for those initial costs that contractors inevitably have, and they will then be paid the remainder on phases depending on the nature of the works as appropriate invoices and the works are actually verified as being undertaken.
Thanks, Mr. Kettrick.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Oh, Councillor Sinclair.
Thanks, Convener. Not so much a question, more well, I suppose there might be a question comes out of this. I know that the Bainsford Hall Community Group have been going through a very long period of time to get to this stage. I don't know if Mr. Kettrick could perhaps outline the differences between the system that was before and the system that we have now, in order to kind of get it out there that the system is now somewhat different, and that it's more streamlined and a more straightforward process for groups to go through, because I know that there have been some difficulties in the past with community asset transfer.
Deputy Convener, it's a fair point that Councillor Sinclair raises. The previous approach adopted by the Council and indeed many authorities was one of a reactive approach to community empowerment applications for asset transfer. We've obviously, as a consequence of the SPR, and many other authorities are now looking upon us and taking similar approaches, promoting asset transfer. We have a team, members of who are actually in attendance today, who are actively engaging with community groups, supporting the development of business cases. We have CVS, our community partner, working alongside us, separate from the Council, to support community groups as that friend at court impartial advice to take forward asset transfers. And I would say that we've probably got as streamlined as it can be what the process is. It's still a very difficult, challenging process at times, but with everybody's will and spirit are progressing towards, we've certainly starting to see the fruits coming, and I think this is one of those moments where we're evidencing that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Sinclair. Do we have any more questions? Councillor Bowes.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Just more a question, and taking out the planning's line, it's a comment on it, and I'd like to say that when you look at how they've raised money, and it's quite impressive with Bainsford, and if you look at the list, page 182, 183, where they've actually raised money, and you've got National Lottery, Scottish Power, Scottish Government's Community Renewal Energy Scheme, as well as Community Choices. It's really a great example when communities can actually go and raise money for their projects. And as I said, when I first read this, I thought that's quite impressive. And there's a few of them in these reports that have got very similar.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, I'd like to move the recommendations. Is there someone?
Convener.
Okay.
I'd like to formally second.
Yes, no problem. Thank you. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
All agreed. Thank you. I'll now ask the convener to come back into the chair.
I'm sure Councillor Gardner did it absolutely perfectly. And thank you, Jim, for stepping in to do that. Moving on to item 5, which is the community asset transfer of Brighton's Community Hall, and we'll go to Mr. Kettrick.
Thank you, Convener. This report is for Brighton's Community Hall and the proposed transfer of it under a 20-year full repair and insuring tenant basis lease for £1 per annum. Again, Council Executive should recognise that Brighton's Village Community Hall are a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation with a community-led membership and a properly constituted and representative Board of Trustees as required by the legislation. Their application and supporting business plan are considered appropriate and valid and have therefore been validated, and appropriate notifications have been undertaken. Taking the decision to asset transfer, members must consider whether the proposals promote or improve the matters outlined at 5.1. And officers are satisfied and of the view that they do, and have outlined this in the evaluation of the application and supporting business plan at sections 5.14 to 5.16. The evaluation is considered compliant in terms of the Council's requirements under the statutory obligations for such assessments. The assessment outcomes for all known financial elements were considered strong or very strong and show the benefits were very good with strongly positive outcomes. In respect of the Enabling Fund, the proposed grant sum is up to £106,490 for works, and these are identified at the table in paragraph 5.20. Should members of the Executive agree to the asset transfer, it is asked to instruct the Director of Police Services to prepare and issue a decision notice containing the necessary legal arrangements for the lease, and I'm happy to take any questions, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Kettrick. We should have found our rhythm now. Is there any questions in relation to this item? No questions? Okay, I'm happy to move the recommendations as in section 2. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. No. Sorry, Councillor Patterson.
No, not at all. I was just especially keen to second this item. And give a shout out that next week they're hosting their first movie night, if anybody wants to watch the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Patterson. Are we happy to agree to the report? I don't know about the Muppets Christmas Carol, but agree. Agreed. Thank you. I'm sure it will be a fantastic event, Councillor Patterson. Item 6 is the community asset transfer of the former Hall Glen Sports Centre, and this is a wee bit different again, so Mr. Kettrick may take a wee bit of time just to explain this particular process, but I'll hand over to him.
Thank you, Convener. This report is for the former Hall Glen Sports Hall and the proposed transfer of ownership for £10,000 to Hall Glen Hub. Unlike the previous applications, the property did not form part of the strategic property review and has been closed since 2019. Members of the Executive should be aware that despite the statutory notification process and engagement with the group, one of the organisations stated as potentially involved in the management of the asset as part of the application has contacted officers to state that this is indeed not the case. Officers have written to Hall Glen Hub requesting clarity on this point, which is an important aspect of the application. Given this is an important aspect that Council Executive may wish to consider, deferring the determination of the application until clarity on this point is obtained through further engagement with the Hall Glen Hub, who are the applicant. I'll now ask Mr. Moody to advise on the appropriate governance arrangements.
Thank you, Convener. And I think what Mr. Kettrick is telling us here is there's been a late representation made in relation to the application, which raises some issues in relation to the content of the application and whether it represents the position going forward. So I think in discussion between myself and Mr. Kettrick, we're of the view that it's a material issue that is being raised. There should be an opportunity for the applicant to comment on this before the Executive proceeds to take a decision on it, and it will also allow officers to fully assess the materiality of the situation that emerges and to provide the appropriate advice to allow for decision making. So in all the circumstances, I think it is the prudent course of action to continue this item to a later date. Now, there is a pre-arranged Executive meeting in December, and it may be that there will be sufficient time to allow it to be added to that agenda, so there may be very little delay occasioned by the continuation, but that will be dependent on the relevant information being made available in time.
Okay, thank you to both Mr. Kettrick and Mr. Moody on that. In view of the requirement for clarification, I think it would be unfair to take a decision today. Therefore, I would suggest to members that we do look to defer. If it is able to be taken to the Executive in December, then fine. If not, I think there's a further one early in January, and I don't know what the impact of that delay would have, but I think it's only fair that we do that in order to make sure that members are fully cited on all the accurate information.
can I agree with you and second you, the continuation. I think we need all the information, especially when there's, as the officer said, it's a significant matter. I think it's right that we should do a continuation to the next possible meeting if the clarification can be got.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bowes. Councillor Hannah?
I agree that further information is needed. The other issue I would like a little more information about is why this particular facility is being asked for 10,000 as opposed to the £1 that others are, but that would come back with the net when it comes back to executive.
Convener, happy to answer that now. Under the legislation, the applications are made by the applicants. It's not for the council to decide what price they wish to pay. From what I understand, they took advice from a third party, and that was what was suggested for them to pay. Other groups who have been engaged more directly with the council colleagues and CVS have obviously submitted theirs on the basis of £1. That would be something for Hall Glen Hub to consider, whether or not they consider it appropriate or whether or not they would wish to make another application. But again, we'll pick that up with them when we're having that discussion, because there has been a suggestion that they may not actually be able to afford that £10,000.
Thank you, convener.
Okay, in which case are we all agreed to defer this item?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Final item is the community asset transfer of Pullman Hill Ski Centre, and again across to you, Mr. Kettrick.
Thank you, Convener. This report is to agree to the transfer of full ownership of Pullman Ski Centre and the Pullman Hill Bungalow, together with granting a non-exclusive right to the car park which is shared with Grangemouth Golf Club. Executive should recognise that Pullman Community Snow Sports Centre, who are the applicant, are a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation with a suitable community-led membership, a properly formed and constituted board of trustees as required by the legislation. The application and supporting business plan have been considered appropriate, and the application has been validated and appropriate notifications undertaken. In taking the decision to asset transfer, members must consider whether the proposals will promote or improve the matters outlined at 5.1, and officers are satisfied and are of the view that they do, and have outlined this in the evaluation of the application and the supporting business plan at sections 5.13 to 5.15. The group's business plan was judged to be good, with a clear recognition that radical changes needed to be made to the previous management arrangements for the operation to be a success. It should be noted the Board of Trustees do have significant experience in the sector, given this is a fairly unique asset, and can bring their professional skills, which will be invaluable in running the facility as a business. Governance arrangements are strong, and best value characteristics are evidenced and contained throughout their overall approach, and the related project benefits were considered by officers to be robust. In respect of the Enabling Fund, the proposed grant is up to £202,274 for works as outlined in the table at 5.16. Should members of the Executive agree to the asset transfer, it is asked to instruct the Director of Police Services to prepare and issue a decision notice containing the necessary legal arrangements, and to incorporate an option for the Council to reacquire the property in line with the circumstances outlined in 7.16. I'm happy to take any questions, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Kettrick. I'll open it up for any questions. No questions? Okay, in which case I will formally move the recommendations as in the report. Councillor Hannah?
I would be very happy to second this. There's been a lot of very hard work done, and thank you to the officers who have supported the group as well, who are in the room, and thank you to the group who have done a tremendous amount of work to bring this, as you said, unique facility into community ownership, and I wish them well.
Okay, thank you. That therefore brings us to the end of this morning's executive. I think that's a record, but thank you everybody for your time and your contributions this morning.
Convener, just before you go, I don't know if it's the first meeting, Councillor Deacon becoming a dad. I don't want to embarrass you, Brian, but it's a unique thing and something to celebrate. So congratulations.
And for those that were in the Foundry on Monday, we met Bethany.
Oh,
so yes, and she's doing well.
And it's not a lot of times that the meetings you come to are